The war in Vietnam was very different than any that came before it or any since. It has been a subject of endless debates for politicians and historians, but the true story of Vietnam can only be told by those who lived it. Stay with us as we discuss Vietnam 50 years later. It has been 50 years since American troops left Vietnam. It was a war unlike any other. For those who served in Vietnam, the memories, both good and bad, would last a lifetime. It was a singular moment in American history that our servicemen and women were witness to in the fields and rice paddies of Vietnam. And now, 50 years later, we still have a lot to learn from the stories and experiences of those brave Americans. Welcome to Veterans Voices. I am Joshua Zedley. Tonight we'll be talking with Vietnam veterans about the reflections of Vietnam. If you're watching live, we want you to be part of the conversation. Call us at 925-313-1170. Send us a message through Facebook at Veteran Voices 1 or email us at veteransvoices@contracostatv.org. To ask a question or make a comment via Zoom, use the QR code on the screen or link our Facebook page. We want to hear from you. My co-host tonight is the Veteran Service Officer from San Francisco County, Elena Kim.
Thanks, Josh. I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited to hear our stories from our Vietnam veterans.
Welcome. All of our guests tonight served in Vietnam. Our first two guests experienced the war mostly from the air. I want to welcome Army veteran Patick Leary and Air Force veteran Dave Smith to the show. Patrick, what unit did you serve with, and can you describe your Vietnam service to us?
I went to Vietnam in November of 1967 as a young warrant officer, 21 years old, and flew with the 52nd Aviation Battalion, 189th Aviation Company. Flew what we call slicks for 3 months, carrying passengers, and then for the last 9 months I flew gunships. That's me up there on the screen. I'm the one on the lower left-hand corner with the great big watch.
Oh, I see that.
Well, thank you for joining us tonight.
And Dave, can you tell us a little bit about your service too?
Sure. I went through Air Force ROTC down in Southern California before I came in the Air Force. And I was stationed at Karat Royal Thai Air Base, which is about in the middle of the country of Thailand. I flew EB-66s with the 42nd Tactical Electronic Warfare Squadron. So our missions over Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam didn't start till we got to the Mekong River and went across what we called the fence.
And where'd you do ROTC down in Southern California?
At USC.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, cool, very cool.
So we have two pilots tonight.
No, now you have the high and low of it.
Thank you.
I was actually a navigator.
A navigator? For us that don't speak pilot, you're a pilot for us, but thank you. And helicopter. Okay.
Helicopter.
Is there a rivalry between navigators, airplanes and helicopters?
Oh, there's always friendly camaraderie, I think, but I think I've got a deep respect for what our Air Force friends did, particularly the ones that were covering us, that flew cover for us.
Right.
And I hope we have the same respect.
Yeah.
So we're here to talk about the Vietnam War and the thoughts on it 50 years later. Patrick, can you tell us a little bit about what it was like when you got back from the war? What was your reception like coming home?
I had a much different experience than most people did. I came back from Vietnam and went right to Germany.
Oh, wow.
So late 1968, the peace protests were just beginning to gather steam. Mm-hmm. It was still not a happy time here in the States, but the peace protests seemed to have developed in that year of '68. But when I got back here, I went right to Germany and passed all that, and I found it a much different experience. In 1969, the World War II was only 25 years in history for the Germans. They had, whether because we won World War II or they have a different attitude, but their respect for their soldiers was much, much different than our folks received back here.
Huh. How so?
We didn't get all the protests there.
Yeah.
We were still treated with respect. I lived on the economy. I had a German landlord. He was very respectful. He wanted to know about my experience, but at no time did he ever negate that or say anything negative about it.
Sounded like there was like a curiosity there.
More of a curiosity. He had also served in the Wehrmacht, so he was interested in comparing experiences.
Wow.
So, but again, it was just a different experience. We didn't get all the protests in the streets. We didn't get protests at the gates or the airports. When we wandered Europe, either on a mission or as off-duty, if you will, throughout Europe, we were treated with respect. So I had a different experience.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing. Dave, what about you? What was your reception like coming back? Did you come back to the States?
Yes, I did, but I was towards the end of the war, so I was there in 72 and 73. So when coming back in 73, it was December 73 when I came home, I flew into Travis Air Force Base. And a friend had gotten my car. He had been taking care of my car for me while I was gone, and I was a career Air Force officer, actually. So I actually had my next assignment to Georgia. So I changed uniform into civilian clothes and drove to Georgia.
Wow.
And one thing, Georgia is a little more conservative, even back then, than California. So I really didn't have any problems because I didn't talk about it and nobody asked. And then next thing you know, I'm back on another Air Force base with other Air Force people.
Yeah. That's interesting though, because even though you might have not had a maybe negative experience, you're saying you didn't talk about it and they didn't ask. I'm curious, did you feel that you couldn't talk about it or you just didn't have the desire to?
Nobody asked.
Yeah.
You know, on the base, you'd talk to other guys and where'd you come from? Oh, what was your last assignment? And you'd talk to them,
But it wasn't something you talked about with civilians.
No.
That's interesting.
So are either of you still in contact with any of the unit members that you had when you were in country that you may share the same experiences with? I know when we all met before the show, you all seem like you know each other, but how about that were actually did the same job as you, the same part of the same unit? Were you able to keep in contact with anyone?
We belong to a tremendous organization here in Contra Costa County, the Vietnam Veterans of Ardell Valley, and that is like who I've kept really learned a lot about these. But as far as people I was stationed with, I kept in touch with a couple of them for a number of years, and then after about 10 years, because I just lost track, and now I don't keep in touch with any of them anymore.
Yeah, the Vietnam Veterans of Ardell Valley is a tremendous organization. I belong to a national organization called Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association, and so I do keep track of some of the folks there. But more specifically, the people that I served with, I was in a gun platoon. We had perhaps 18 pilots there. Of those 18 pilots, you know, we're getting up on our age right now. We're in our late 70s. You know, there's only 3 or 4 of us that are able to still keep in contact. So the numbers are dwindling.
Yeah. I'm curious, so both of you got back and you were still in the military. It wasn't like you got back from Vietnam and you got out right away and integrated. So it sounds like there was a bit of a buffer time before you fully got out of the military. Did you have any readjustment issues coming back? And if so, did you notice them right away, or is it something that you kind of look back now and see maybe there was some challenges there?
Well, for me, when I came back from Germany, I still had to finish my college degree, and I went down to Florida to a school called Embry-Riddle, and that is very veteran-centric. So through my school years, I basically maintained a military friendships with a lot of the guys that are still going through school there.
On campus?
On campus, right.
Oh, interesting.
So again, that buffer really helped me quite a bit. When I graduated, one of the things the military did for me, I think for others too, it really gives you a focus about goals and setting objectives and setting goals. And when I graduated, I was focused on building my family, building a career.
Yeah.
So a lot of that stuff was, the military stuff became secondary.
Yeah. What about you, Dave?
My experience with the air war versus the ground war, And I was telling Pat that I think I'd put helicopters in the ground more, closer to that, because they're right there. They're the low part. I was always 14,000, 20,000 feet up in the air. It's a very impersonal war, where I'm given, here's a point I want you to be at this specific time, and do this specific thing. When you're finished, you go on to the next, and to the next. So it's very same as the training I was in or out, whether I was in combat, you know, you got the chance you can get shot down in combat, but then I actually lost more friends in training and operational missions in the States after the war.
Wow.
Than actually over there. So it was,
So looking back 50 years, how do you think it's shaped you into the person that you became after you transitioned out? Because obviously when you go through something like that, I don't think there's anything else in life besides maybe, you know, a death to a close family member that can really phase you in a way. I think you can take on life a lot more than people that weren't in those situations. I'm just kind of wondering, how do you view life now? After Vietnam, did you feel like now I can do anything? And I know you're an author, right, sir? And you've had successful life after you transition out. Do you think your experiences in Vietnam led you to this successful life when you exited?
well, the one experience that my biggest fear in Vietnam was not getting killed in an airplane accident. It was getting shot down and becoming a POW. I was so afraid, not knowing what it would be like if I could return with honor. And that scared me to death. So I planned my missions, researched and reviewed them so much before we went out. I wanted to know the terrain. I wanted to know the specific where the AAA was, the anti-aircraft batteries were. I wanted to know where the surface-to-air missile sites were. We had all that information because we'd be flying there near those. I didn't want to get into a situation where I put us where we shouldn't be. So the planning aspect was something that I could carry on because everything we do in life, there's some sort of planning you're doing. You're studying for a test. You're practicing for a football game. You know, that kind of stuff. But planning was a big part of it for me.
That's an excellent point, Dave. I think similar to mine. The military prepares you for success. They want you to succeed, and planning is certainly part of it. And I look at the military as being Facts of Life 101. Okay, and that's your college course. But as old as I am, my veteran service, my military service, is a small percentage of my life. Okay, but the military gave me a foundation to move on in life with the skills that Dave mentioned. You know, planning, operations, setting goals, achieving objectives that I think have been most beneficial in my civilian careers.
When you got out, it sounds like you brought this really awesome core set of skills that you got from the military. I know, Patrick, you said that you went to college afterwards. Was that on the GI Bill?
Correct.
Okay.
$175 a month.
Oh my God. Which had to pay your tuition, your anything, your books, everything, right?
Yeah.
So besides the GI Bill at the time, and I don't know, Dave, did you use the GI Bill as well?
I got my master's
With the GI Bill?
on active duty with it, yes.
Oh, okay. Besides that program, what other programs have you as a veteran utilized, experienced, learned about, whether it be with the VA or you know, maybe a different type of local program? Anything that you've kind of used that you found helpful in your post-military life?
I'll tell you what, I think Contra Costa County, our Martinez Hospital,
The VA hospital?
people can say whatever they want about the VA and the rest of the country. I don't know for that, but this is one of the best ones, and they are very attentive, and my needs are all met there. And I think that's one great thing that I've been able to get is having them help me with my health care.
Yeah, the VA hospital definitely serves as a sort of one-stop shop now. Even there's lots of programs coming out of the hospitals. So that's great. You used education, you used the healthcare. Anything else you could think of that you?
Throughout
high school?
my career, I relied primarily on my employer's benefit package, if you will.
Yeah.
But the transition from being employed to retirement is a big transition. And I think that's where the VA, quite frankly, helped me more than anything else. The camaraderie that you get belonging to various organizations, Vietnam vets, even though we may not have served at the same time or in the same branch of service, we're brothers. You know,
Yeah.
we did it together. We did it, and being able to establish those contacts when you retire, particularly for me, we moved from Kansas City to California, and I didn't know anybody.
Yeah.
You know, and to bump into or to join the organizations that I've joined, you know, the VFW and Vietnam Vets of Diablo Valley has been just a tremendous help and tremendous asset for me, you know, to adjust to retirement.
There you go.
Harder adjustment than it was getting out of the service.
Well, speaking of those organizations that you sort of plugged into, you yourself started an organization, is that right, Patrick?
No, correction. I was fortunate enough to join an organization that already existed. Back in 2005, a number of Vietnam veterans from Auburn, California, started, at that time, a small charity called Friends of Vin Son Orphanage. And it is dedicated to supporting, there's a picture there.
Oh, I love that.
That's one of my life skills, by the way, is blowing balloon animals.
You did that.
That's one of my life skills. But we can go back to that picture later. I'll tell you some stories about it if you'd like. But there's 800 children, Montagnard children, up in the Con Tum, Pleiku, Dak To area of Vietnam that we help support. The Montagnards are a different ethnic group than the Vietnamese. And they are, they're Aboriginals. I guess if there's a comparison, it would be the Native American Indian to the Irish immigrant. It's the same difference in cultures, if you will.
Wow.
So their culture is still up in the Central Highlands, still in what we might call the backwoods, if you will. So I've been working with them since 2009, and I was fortunate enough to be elected president a number of years ago and have maintained that position, and very proud of what we do.
That's so great.
Very proud of what we do.
I love those pictures too. Thank you for sharing those with us.
You hit a point that we talked about a couple of shows ago, is that when we're in, we're really around that same branch. But when we get out, we're all veterans. So really start learning about other branches and other jobs and, you know, Air Force, Army, and we have a couple of Army coming on later and some Navy. No Marines tonight, but that's okay. But I think we need to, it's great that silo was kind of broken down a little bit more when we're veterans now. And that's what I really appreciate about having you both here. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you both. Navigator, helicopter pilot. Did I get that right, sir?
You did.
All right.
The high and low of it.
The high and the low. All right. So I have one quick question. I don't think we're going to have time. I don't. Okay. When we return, we will hear about the experiences of 2 more Vietnam veterans. But before that, we want to hear some thoughts from Nevada County Veteran Service Officer David West in a new segment we call A Word with the VSO.
Hello, everybody. My name is David West, and I'm the Nevada County Veteran Services Officer. And when it comes to our Vietnam veterans, first I'd like to say one thing. It's because of you that my generation and younger generations of yours have the benefits that we have today. It says it in the Vietnam Veterans Charter. Please don't let another generation of veterans leave another behind. With the recent passage of the PACT Act, a lot of benefits have been available to veterans or their surviving spouses that they weren't entitled to before. So I'm encouraging anybody that isn't a veteran that is watching this, that has an elderly veteran or a surviving spouse whose husband served during the Vietnam era and was told recently or years ago that they weren't entitled to benefits, to please re-engage with services and re-engage with our veteran community and contact your local VSO. The recent passage of the PACT Act has made it possible for these surviving spouses that were told years ago they're not entitled to benefits and they've been unplugged from our network, and they might be struggling now, and they might have the potential to earn benefits now in a much easier time that they weren't told they weren't before. So if you have a loved one, a friend, a family that's going through a hard time that is a Vietnam veteran or is a surviving spouse of a Vietnam veteran, please put them in contact with the local VSO. Thank you.
We're talking about Vietnam 50 years later. If you're watching live, we invite you to be a part of this conversation. Call us at 925-313-1170, send us a message through Facebook at Veterans Voices 1, or email us at veteransvoices@contracostatv.org. To ask a question or make a comment via Zoom, use the QR code on the screen or the link on our Facebook page. We want to hear from you. And now we want to welcome our guests from the Army, Stephen Burchik and James Hill, who spent the war in the fields of Vietnam. Welcome, Steve and Jim. If you could start us off, and by the way, Steve is a former co-host on the show, so we know each other very well, but if you could start off for our viewers at home and tell us a little bit about your military service.
I was in the Army, 1st Infantry Division. We were stationed in 3 Corps, northeast of Saigon, and area with lots of jungles and rivers. And I was there June 68 to June 69.
We've seen some of those jungles and rivers there on the screen, so thank you for contributing those photos too, Steve. Jim, what about you? Can you tell us a little bit about your military service?
Yes, I was in the Army and with the 25th Infantry Division in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. And we deployed to South Vietnam in January of '66. And we were stationed in a community called Cu Chi, which is where all the tunnels and were found. And it was near the rubber tree plantations. At any rate, I was a rifle platoon leader the first 6 months. And then the second 6 months, I was a Pathfinder.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for being here.
Yes, thank you guys. It's nice seeing you again. We met last week a couple times. I appreciate you joining us again today. So I know our previous guests, they did multiple years in the military, and you both did. Was it 4, Stephen?
I was 2 years in the service.
And then
I was 7 active, 2 reserve.
okay, so you did a decent amount of time, but then you also transitioned a lot sooner than our last 2 guests. So maybe you can elaborate on what was the reception you received when you came back to the States?
I got back June 69, and by that time, the country was in a great deal of turmoil. In 1968, deployment peaked at 500,000 U.S. troops in country. Every day on the news, the figures were coming in. They'd be showing the number of people killed. So understandably, a lot of people were upset. I had heard this from other people, so coming back, I was discharged out of Oakland Army Base. It was my last day in the Army, my last day in Vietnam. And I had been advised by some other people, so as soon as I got out, took my uniform off. Didn't talk about the service. The few times I did, it would result in a heated discussion in some cases.
Wow.
And actually that lasted more than 40 years. And I'll describe when the transition came. But the only other issue was when I got back, my wife and I, my fiance and I were engaged to be married in about 4 weeks. And it was about 4 days later, and we're walking along, and there was a backfire from a car, and I hit the ground because other times it had helped save my life. In this case, I got a little mud on my shirt, but fortunately, cars don't backfire as much anymore. The electronic ignition helps.
That's interesting.
Thank you. Jim, how was when you came back to the States, how were you treated? How was the reception?
Well, I came back in January of '67 and came back into Travis Air Force Base, as Steve did, and then I was heading back east to my home in Richmond, Virginia. So I was going to fly to Washington, D.C., so I went to San Francisco. Well, as everybody knows, San Francisco is pretty aggressive, so they were ahead of the curve on demonstrations. And I walk into the airport, and the first thing that happens, a young woman and a young man spit on me. And that was my introduction, return home. So
You were in uniform?
I was in uniform.
Wow.
I then went to the restroom, changed my uniform, and then proceeded going to the East Coast.
Was that unexpected, or did you sort of feel?
Had no clue, and it was very disheartening, and unfortunately I took action, so
Wow.
caused me to do something I didn't want to do.
I'm sorry that you had to experience that. I know that we've heard stories like that before, but for you to have personally experienced that. I want to back up and hear more about the day-to-day life in Vietnam, but I also want to tell you, Jim, I was deployed with 25th ID as well to Iraq when I was in the Army.
Oh, no kidding.
So we have that in common.
Yes, we do.
I got to Schofield Barracks, and everybody was really jealous because they said, oh, you're going to get to go to Hawaii, right? And I did, and I was deployed 90 days later. I was on an airplane to Kuwait and then into Iraq. So my tour in Hawaii was very short, but I enjoyed it nonetheless.
Well, nonetheless, tropic lightning.
Yeah, exactly. Steve, you showed us some really great pictures there. Can you talk to us about the day-to-day life? I know you've taken lots of photos, you've written about this. It might seem like, common knowledge to you, but even for me, looking at some of those photos, I mean, I was just shocked. You do such a great job of documenting the day-to-day life. I think I asked you when I read your book, Focus on Vietnam, what surprised me the most was that there was not a lot of body armor in those photographs versus my experience in Iraq. I mean, we never were seen without our body armor. So talk to us about some of those photos and what everyday life was like when you were deployed.
Well, I was, after a few months, I was made a sergeant and given the role of a forward observer. So I spent a week with an artillery officer on patrols, and every 10 minutes it said, okay, where are we on the map? And I had to indicate it, and then call in some practice fire calls for mortar and or artillery. So basically I went out with either our unit, which was a mortar unit, on patrols, and we went patrolling 3-4 days a week, or I'd go out with the regular line units, the infantry units, and accompany them. Basically it was like commuting. I mean, we'd get up, have breakfast. About 7 o'clock, the choppers come in, would pick us up from wherever we were. Short flight, 15, 20 minutes, drop us off in the boonies, and then we would move 10 kilometers to some other pickup point at the end of the day. So normally our missions ended at the end of the day. They would pick us up, fly us back. Sometimes we'd stay over 2 or 3 days. In terms of the pictures, I was not an official photographer. I just had some experience with a camera. And I asked the officers, can I bring a camera along? And they said, you can, but if you screw up, it's gone. I said, I understand. So I only brought it out twice a month. I'd pick a day when the map said we weren't going to be crossing too many rivers. And I'd bring 10 rolls of film. So every hour we took a 5-minute break. I pulled the camera out, shoot 24, 36 shots, put it back, reload the film, and then an hour later took some more. So basically we were doing search and destroys. Basically we'd go out every day looking for trouble. And sometimes we found it, sometimes we didn't.
Wow.
Well, Steve, seeing the photos, I thought you were a professional photographer.
Yeah.
I didn't know. Jim, a little bit about your day-to-day experience. I know you were Pathfinder.
Well, my first 6 months of tour, I was on the line as an infantry officer, small unit infantry officer. So I had a platoon, 44 men, and we would do, much like Steve, when we crossed the wire, we generally stayed out for a number of days, anywhere from 5 to 30 days at a time. And they were search and destroy missions. We had a little bit different. He was crossing rivers. We were finding trenches, spider holes, and tunnels. And they were right outside of Cu Chi, as Cu Chi was the home of the NLF, the National Liberation Front, which was the VC, and supported by the NVA, which is the North Vietnamese Army. It was a focal point. Our area of operation, AO, was Iron Triangle, Michelin rubber tree plantations called the Bolo Woods, the Hobo Woods. They were infested with the Kong because Cu Chi sat 35 miles from Saigon, but if you went another 50 miles, you were at the Cambodian border. So they had a town called Tay Ninh. They could transmit or travel from Tay Ninh down through to Cu Chi and then into Saigon. That was their goal, shortest route. So we ran into a lot of both, VC and NVA.
Wow.
So it was often a lot of pretty heavy firefighting.
Wow.
And so, that was the first 6 months. During that time, I was promoted. I was part of a a weapons platoon, which had the mortars, which Steve mentioned that he was an FO for. And then eventually, as a first lieutenant, I became a company executive officer, second in command of the company.
I could see why, both of you sharing some of those experiences, I could see why when you came back, Steve, you had that reaction to the sounds from the vehicles, right? So I know that you did these photographs and you ended up putting them together for a book. Can you tell us a little bit about that book, Steve?
I mentioned earlier that when I got back, I took the uniform off and I didn't talk about Vietnam. More than 40 years. Family and some close friends knew, but places where I worked socially, I never talked about it.
Wow.
It became a habit. That changed about 10 years ago when a friend of the family, she teaches an English course at a local high school, asked me to give a short talk to some of the students. So I came in, did a slide presentation with a number of the shots for 2 sections of her class. Didn't think much about it. 2 nights later, she invites my wife and I to dinner, hands me a folder with 60 letters written by the students saying, thank you for your service.
Wow.
And sharing your story. That was the first time anybody had ever said anything positive about the Vietnam experience. An adult group heard about it. They asked me to give a talk. I gave a talk to them, showed the slides again. At the end, a woman comes up and says, well, when is the book coming out? And I had no plans to write a book, but went home, talked to my wife, and I said, do you still have the letters I sent you? I'd sent her a letter almost every day. She responded.
Oh, wow.
She said, yeah, they're in shoe boxes in the closet. Pulled them out, spent a year putting them together in a book, published it. And in fact, there's a shot of the book behind Josh's head on the
There we are.
on the wall there.
Compass and a camera.
Compass and a camera, and it wound up winning a silver medal at the Independent Publishers Awards in New York, and changed my life. I went from not talking about it to giving talks. I would be doing 40 or 50 talks a year.
Wow.
So it was a major transition. It was kind of like somebody said, well, it's okay now.
Wow.
So.
That's so amazing to hear. And it's such an unplanned situation, right? You were taking the photographs, you didn't have that intention. You were writing to your wife. You didn't know that that was all going to culminate into this book one day. So, wow, what an excellent experience. For both of you, or either of you, are you still in contact with any of the members from the unit that you served in? And if so, what are those relationships like?
In my case, I hadn't been in contact, once again, for 40 years. But after the book came out, a couple of them heard about it. I reached out to as many as I could, because in researching the book, kind of wanted to find out, who was where. And I located, I guess, about a dozen people. So about half a dozen of us keep in contact. We're on Facebook, and you know, there's a guy in New Jersey that I served with, and he and I post things related to, you know, this most recently Veterans Day, et cetera. So it kind of, with a 40-year gap, brought together some special relationships.
Excellent.
I've only run into one of the fellows that I served with in the Pathfinder detachment. It was a detachment of 15 people, 2 officers and 13 enlisted. And he lived in Florida, and I ran into him through the National Pathfinder Association.
Wow.
So that was the only thing. We talked about a few things, and it just brought back things, because it happened literally, probably, like he said, 10 years ago.
Wow.
But my experience about unpacking my baggage from the Vietnam War, because I was like Steve, after I served my tour, I put everything in a duffel and it went in the back end of the closet, and hardly anybody knew I was in the service. And then right around 2004, I was having my carpet fixed, and it turned out to be the president, or soon to be president of the Vietnam Veterans of Diablo Valley.
Oh.
And he invited me to come down to a meeting, and I thought, well, it was time. I did go to the meeting, but I was still working. I backed off until I retired, and then got more active. I wanted to be able to give, not take. So, and became friends with a number of the veterans. You know, they were all warm. They'd been through what I'd been through, and we could talk about things. It just was an awakening, if you will. So it was very important,
Yeah.
very important. And during that time, I also found out about the VA and their programs. And so medically, I was having issues, didn't know what they were. And the VA took me in, and they really took care of me.
That's really good.
That's
to
great to hear. I mean, I wanted to ask you both what services he's taking care of, and if you felt the same way about the VA that our previous guests have. I'm very glad to hear that, because you've all have heard this from me before in the past, that I think you all are the majority of the reason why the VA is taking steps to you know, increase the level of care and level of service, because what you may have received at the beginning is not the same that you're receiving now. So any other benefits that I know you used your GI Bill, right, Jim? And
Yes, I did. When I came back from Vietnam, I was going to my next duty station, which happened to be in Richmond, Virginia. I had the ability, I guess through, you know, being awarded some decorations, that I had a little bit of sway, and I was able to get Richmond. That's where I went to college, because I wanted very much to get a master's degree. So I got stationed in Virginia and was able, during that time, to earn a master's degree. And I got that was paid for through the GI Bill. And then I got into the VA hospital, obviously, when I was in California. And when I say they took care of me, they discovered some issues that I had due to Agent Orange. For example, type 2 diabetes. Ended up with an ischemic heart attack. They were able to diagnose that, and a number of issues from wounds that I had received. So
This is something that we hear about a lot in terms of veterans connecting with the VA from Vietnam and getting that care. So we do want to hear more about that, but before we do, we're going to go to a quick break. When we return, we'll hear about veterans, Vietnam veterans, from the perspective of the Navy. So please stay with us. But first, we want to pay tribute to Vietnam veteran and poet Bill Nelson, who passed away recently. He was a fixture in our local veterans community. He would often read his service-inspired poems at veterans events, like this reading at the 2022 Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors Veterans Day celebration. He will be missed.
What a privilege this is, and an honor and humbling. This year, the title of my poem is We Served. A call to arms, freedom's bell, right hand raised, forward one step, life changed forever. Commitment to our country, some on the wall in harm's way, some not. Some with nightmares in the night, some not. Some carry scars to remind, some not. We served, we all served. As one lifts his voice in praise or protest, someone paid the price for that right, the veteran. As you greet one who served, thank you for your service. There may be a story of sacrifice, great or small, a wounded heart, burdens hard to bear. We celebrate all those who can say, we served, the veteran. Thank you.
We are talking with Vietnam veterans. If you're watching live, we invite you to be part of the conversation. Call us at 925-313-1170. Send us a message through Facebook at Veteran Voices 1 or email us at veteransvoices@contracostatv.org. To ask a question or make a comment via Zoom, use the QR code on the screen or link on our Facebook page. Now I want to welcome Navy veterans Dennis Giacovelli and Eric Ardell to the show. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, Dennis, could you tell me what unit did you serve with, and can you describe your service in Vietnam?
In Vietnam, I was on a boat called a STAB. It's a strike assault boat squadron. It was 24 foot long, basically a little ski boat. It was made because it was very fast. It was.
And there we have it on the screen here.
Yes, very low, very fast, very silent. We had a 4-man crew. That's me, the second from the left, with the Mr. Christopher medal.
You guys look really young there. What's the average age of those folks?
I was probably 20.
Wow, wow. Great photo. Eric, what about you? Can you tell us a little bit about your military service?
Okay. After an initial tour out of San Diego, I was transferred as ops officer on LST 1032, the USS Monmouth County, old World War II LST, and we ran the rivers in the Delta. Didn't run into Dennis down there, but probably came close a few times. And in a second tour, I was.
We got you on the screen as well, Eric.
Yes, that's me returning from Vietnam in country. And the interesting thing about that was I was on a 707 with probably 140 other servicemen coming home. My mom and my brother were the only two people that met us.
Wow.
There was no other relatives there.
Wow.
So it's unfortunate. But we didn't have any protests because we were on the Air Force Base.
Oh.
But then I went on to serve as chief engineer on destroyer, doing plane guarding for aircraft carriers and shore bombardment. And then my last active duty tour, I was on an LSD, and we were in on the fall of Saigon.
So did you deploy twice then?
4 times.
4 times. Oh my gosh. What was the year that of your final deployment when you returned?
That was in 1975.
1975.
Yeah. My first tour was in 68, 69 in country.
Was there any difference in terms of each time you returned, the type of reception that you got?
Well, no, because the one tour I was only in country. And the other times I was always off the coast, so we didn't really have any interface with the Vietnamese.
And what about you, Dennis? What was your experience coming back from Vietnam?
I grew up in San Francisco, and I joined at Treasure Island there. When I came back from Vietnam, they weren't quite sure what to do with me. I was short. I only had a couple months left. So they made me a bouncer at the EM club.
All right.
Now, but they warned us not to wear our uniforms off the base. And we didn't. I did stay in a couple of years in the reserves after that. And there were a couple times when we did wear our uniforms, and we we ended up in a gay bar, a lesbian bar, and a biker bar all in one night, and we never bought a drink.
Wow.
So you just never know.
All right.
Well, that's good to hear. Everyone's inclusive in their drink buying.
Yeah.
So when you did exit the military, I know you did different times. How was your transition to your civilian life and your civilian jobs? The previous guests talked about they didn't mention it to their coworkers. Nobody really knew. It kind of came out as just somehow, but it wasn't them, taking it themselves. They waited a while.
Yeah.
So Dennis,
40 years, I
40 years?
tried to forget it. Yeah.
that seems like it's about
40
the
years,
same as the
everyone says.
the other guest as well. Eric, is that the same for you?
Well, it was a little different because I ended up spending 9 years on active duty. And then when I got off active duty, I stayed in the reserves. And I went into the defense industry, which was mostly military guys that were working there anyway. So I started out in San Diego, which is pretty much a military town.
Right.
And then I came up to San Francisco. So I think my transition was a bit easier, but it was a little of a shock when you come in with a plane load of guys coming back from overseas in a year, and you end up at Travis, and there's just my brother and my mother, no other relatives, any of them. So, and I'm sure some of them were from the Bay Area.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So we heard from Steve, who talked a little bit about some of the sort of flashback that he experienced when he heard the sound from a vehicle, and then Jim shared that there were some health issues that he eventually realized many years later and got some help with from the VA. Were there any adjustment issues that you experienced personally when you returned or when you got out of the military?
Not particularly for me. Of late, I've been concerned about Agent Orange because a lot of the Mekong Delta was sprayed with Agent Orange, and that's where I spent a year. Fortunately, I don't think I have any symptoms at this point, but that's certainly of concern for a lot of Vietnam vets.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the County Veteran Service Officer coming out of me. We all know that the PACT Act was just
Yes.
passed by the VA, and it addresses Agent Orange and some presumptive conditions that if you have these physical conditions going on, you go to the VA, you could claim some disability ratings. Are there benefits that you guys are finding useful in the community now, whether it be with the VA or in your local community?
No, I have Medicare, so and TRICARE for life because I'm retired Navy.
Oh,
And so I feel pretty comfortable. And I do use the VA here in Martinez for hearing and stuff and things like that. So, and they're a very, very good outfit. They take very good care of the vets in this area.
Josh, I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
For a veteran who maybe has some concerns that maybe there was some Agent Orange exposure, would you encourage them to come into your office?
I would encourage them to go into any county veteran service office. If you're watching from not Contra Costa County, you can go to San Francisco, you can go to Alameda, you can go to Contra Costa. I want you to be taken care of wherever you're at. But if you want to go to Contra Costa, we're at 10 Douglas in Martinez. Highly recommended. Thank you for
Got to
plugging
make
my
that
office.
plug
Little
for
plug.
you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Well, I think the interesting thing is the PACT Act expanded the conditions that may have been caused by Agent Orange. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah. I think that one of the newest locations that a lot of veterans haven't heard is Thailand, and that's, my own father was in Thailand in the Air Force in Vietnam, and that's, just about 2 years ago, I think Thailand was added to the list. So if you're watching and you didn't know, if you were in Thailand, definitely there's some conditions that could be attributed to that area. How about the GI Bill? Did either of you use the GI Bill?
Yes.
Right when you got out, or was it kind of?
Well, I ended up looking for a job in Vietnam, considering I thought I was getting off active duty when I came home from that first tour. I found out I had been selected to go to postgraduate school, so I stayed in the Navy and did that. And then after I got off active duty, I used the GI Bill to get a second master's degree.
Oh, a second master's degree.
Nice.
Dennis?
So not the same experience I'm
No.
gathering. What was your experience like coming back and using the GI Bill?
I went back to school. I started a year in City College
Yeah.
before I joined.
Wow.
And that wasn't going well. I spent a lot of time playing cards. So that's why I knew I was going to get drafted. So I joined the Navy. But after, within, I believe, a month, maybe a month and a half, I did go back to school and use the VA.
In San Francisco?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Did you return to City College?
No.
Oh.
No, I went to Hield's Engineering College.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
So the military probably made you a little more disciplined when you went back to college
Yeah,
the second
absolutely.
time. I don't think that's a story, or actually I know that's a story we hear daily. That's my story too. See, there we go. Went to college for 1 year before, went to the military. I was like, oh, now this is easy. So you don't have to have 2 master's degrees. Eric's overachieving, and I've noticed the panel tonight. Everyone is very successful, and I think that's because of their military service really guides you in that direction to, have discipline. You're going to take care of yourself, take care of your family, and take care of the service members to your left and to your right. So when you're looking back, it's been 50 years. Does it seem like it's been 50 years to you? I'm not sure. You said 40 years until you didn't talk about it until 10 years ago, and you were about the same. So that stuff was buried for 40 years, and now that you're able to get it out, I'm just wondering. I mean, you guys have me on the leaning forward in this chair, and all of the guests have. Just listening to your stories and just trying to wrap my head around how you could keep that down for 40 years, and what it felt like when you were able to get it out and join Diablo Valley or Vietnam veterans at Diablo Valley, join the American Legion, and talk to other service members that had the same experiences as you. Did that just feel like, I wish I would have done this 30 years ago, or is it that's just what you needed to do?
Well, in my case, 2 of my boat group was very small. There was only 100 of us plus 20 or so support. So we were very tight. And about, I don't know, maybe 18 years ago, 2 of the guys decided that they were going to find every one of us.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So they started contacting, calling, and I got a call one night. And even then, I didn't reciprocate. It took me a couple of years after that. There's a reunion every other year called the Game Wardens, and it's for all the Brownwater Navy boat people. So eventually I went to a couple of those, and because we were so small, we didn't get any recognition. We weren't even there, basically. So we started our own reunion. So we have it every other year on the years they don't. And we're still doing that. We've done, I think, 12 years of that. We go to the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee.
Oh, wow.
In big cabins, and about 46 of us spend 5 days together every other year, and it's like you never left.
Is it just the service members, or did the family come out too?
Or mostly wives, and once in a while we get a brother,
Yeah.
or a son, or a nephew.
That's good to have the support there too. That's excellent.
Absolutely, it's amazing.
What an experience. And how fortunate to have somebody who coordinated and reached out and said, I'm going to get in touch with everyone.
Yes.
That's so great.
They've since retired, and I'm one of the people.
Oh, no, you got tapped for that job. Eric, what about you? Do you still keep in touch with anyone that you were deployed to Vietnam with?
No, I have a shipmate that I was served on 2 ships. Actually, he relieved me as chief engineer on one of them. And we've stayed in touch closely for years,
Yeah.
and we visit when we can. We were both our best mans on our 2 weddings, but the shipmates on the in Vietnam. I've lost track of all of them at this point, but I still keep track of several others on the other ships I served on.
Yeah. Wow, that's excellent.
So maybe we can talk a little bit about the VA, because we've talked about the VA with the other two panels. Have you noticed significant changes in the last 10, 15 years? And is there something that you're happy that's changed? I mean, I think everything is going better than it was 20, 30 years ago, right?
Sure.
How are they taking care of you?
I also have Kaiser, so
Okay.
I bounce back and forth depending on what I
In your
both of
position,
them,
you hear from other veterans about the
Yes.
VA. And
I had, years ago, I had a wonderful doctor, an older gentleman, and I loved him. And several of us I've talked to also had that same doctor. And then he retired.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they gave me somebody else, and then she retired or left. So I went away for the general practitioner part of it. And I do my ears and specific things.
Yeah. Eric, besides the GI Bill, are there other programs that you've utilized, whether it be through the VA, healthcare, or any others?
No, as a couple of the other fellows mentioned, I always had employment insurance.
Oh, great.
And because I was, I spent, 25 years in the service in reserves, and most of my civilian employment was military related. I always had people that were in the military, so it was easy to transition from one thing to the next. And it's only recently I've got involved with the VA because of Agent Orange and my hearing and things like
same
that.
as our last.
But it's been very good. I've always heard the stories about, especially down like in Arizona, where the VA was supposedly just terrible. I mean, absolutely terrible. But my experience here in the Bay Area, especially in Martinez, has been exceptional. I thought it's been very good.
that is great to hear. It seems like a good theme for tonight that the VA has made its way to helping everyone the best that they can, and things have changed. And like I mentioned with the other panel, I think our generation, Elena and I, and the generations that follow us, owe it to you all for keep fighting for that and making sure that
Absolutely.
we all get the care that we need, and your generation gets it as well. So thank you both.
Thank you both.
And we made it through this entire panel without any Marine jokes. So that's interesting. So
Go Navy.
that's right. Thank you for joining us. That ends our panel conversation for the evening. I want to thank all of our guests for sharing their stories with us tonight.
We hope you have enjoyed our conversation tonight. We leave you with some resources if you found our conversation inspiring. The Vietnam Veterans of Diablo Valley provides support and camaraderie for local Vietnam veterans. Reach out to them at vnvdv.org. The Vietnam Veterans of America serves Vietnam veterans across the country. Find them at vva.org. The National Association of County Veteran Service Officers is a great place to start if you are looking for services and benefits for Vietnam veterans and their families. Find a veteran service officer near you at nacvso.org. Veterans Voices is brought to you in part by contributions from the Diablo Valley Veterans Foundation, dedicated to helping veterans near you. American Legion Post 246, honoring the tradition of American Legion in Danville. If you would like to help sponsor Veterans Voices, you can donate to Veterans Voices care of Diablo Valley Veterans Foundation. Get in touch with them at diabloveterans.org. To rewatch tonight's episode, check back on our homepage later this week or check your cable provider schedule for rebroadcast times. You can also rewatch this episode and many others on our YouTube channel, Veterans Voices of Contra Costa. So be sure to subscribe. Our next show will air on Monday, December 11th at 7 p.m. It will be our best of 2023. You won't want to miss it. To all veterans and their families, thank you for serving. To all of you who've tuned in tonight, thanks for watching and have a great evening.